Welcome to the Cyber Cognition Podcast, a show that seeks to understand the future and the increasingly complicated relationship between society and technology. Explore the worlds of cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, transhumanism, robotics, and other fascinating topics at the frontiers of science and discovery, with your hosts, Hutch and Len.
There was, of course, the ban on TikTok, and it went into effect. So they preemptively took the site down. It was down for approximately 2 days. Within that time, a bunch of people that had been using TikTok started to go to other Chinese social network apps like Red Note, Lemonade. It was, for a lot of people, it was this form of social protest of, you're not going to tell me where I can and can't share my data. And it was just that. It was a social protest. So you've got this activist mentality right now going across, where people are intentionally adopting Chinese apps. And then it was pretty much the perfect storm. They released those benchmarks. People were already excited about ChatGPT and other large language model technology, and suddenly we're actively looking for Chinese apps just to stick it to the man.
It's just insanity to me, especially with all of the current knowledge and everything that we know about the Chinese Communist government. Like you started off with, this whole thing with TikTok has been going on for what, a year and a half, 2 years now? And all I'm going to say is this, and then I'm going to let you continue, because if something is insecure or there's a problem, and we try to avoid a lot in politics on this show, but sometimes we have to skirt right up to the line. If TikTok is a problem, and the problem is the fact that it's got a governmental ability to spy on its users, in this case, it's the Chinese government. What makes the fact that because if you remember, Trump, right after he got in, said that, we may let TikTok stay as long as we are the ones that are the overseers. So this, in my opinion, beyond what you're saying, Hutch, is we're basically throwing the gauntlet down and saying, which government do we want to spy on us? And it's a choice at this point between what the devil you know or the devil you don't.
Yeah, and I think there's a little bit more to it also, because I mean, there has been, I've had some discussions with people online who have largely claimed that the "don't use the Chinese app" perspective is everything from xenophobic, it's Western exceptionalism, all the way down to it's even racism. And I think that that's an overreaction, and I don't think that most people that are advocating "don't use this app," that's not what they're saying.
Not at all. No, we're
It,
saying don't use this specific app.
Well, and honestly, I would argue, and I still don't think it's xenophobic or racist or anything, but I would argue that using any app from China is probably not the best in your best interest. I think that, I mean, to your point, this is the Chinese Communist Party. This is the same party still in power that literally slaughtered thousands of their people when they stood up and said, "We want government reform and we want democracy."
Well, even beyond that, two of the things that really stood out to me about DeepSeek was a couple of people did two specific questions at the prompt. The first one was, tell me about Tiananmen Square. And the weird thing is it, just like every other LLM and what I've been saying since ChatGPT first started, these are like little teenage children that know all of the answers and all of the bad words. They're just told not to say them. So if you ask about Tiananmen Square, very quickly, some text will pop up on the screen, and then almost immediately it'll flip to one of those, "I'm sorry, I don't have anything to say about that. Would you like to talk about something else?" So they are right with that. We're modifying the narrative. And then the second question that I found really interesting was, tell me about Taiwan. And the response was something like, Taiwan is an integral part of China's history and is not recognized as having any type of independence. So our enemies and who are fighting a disinformation campaign with us normally have to find a way to get it through the censors, through all of, the red tape to make it into the United States. This is almost like an informational reverse TCP attack in some ways, because they're not reaching out to us. We're reaching out to them and allowing them to basically push what we know to be an incorrect narrative, and we're doing it by choice.
Yeah,
They took hackers methodology and say, I can't attack you and get through your firewall. Reach out to me.
yeah, yeah. I think there's a couple things here. So uh, similar to what you said, I've seen several of the videos where it will start to respond with information about Taiwan or Tiananmen Square, and then you'll immediately see a redaction. Um, for anybody that's not familiar with how these systems work, that's really an application layer control where they're modifying the output of the model after it starts outputting and then shutting it down when they see potentially devious or um, behavior that doesn't conform with the way that they want it to operate. Um, so we're seeing that on the web version. I've also had several conversations with people who have used the offline version and have found that it does tend to be more helpful with some of that information that you otherwise wouldn't expect the web-based model to interact with. And so I do think that shows that they do have some additional censorship sitting on the front end. I think, to your point, that should be a red flag because obviously, yes, we have these things that we know that the Chinese models like this are not going or are going to very much craft the world in their own narrative and their own perspective. And really, by there, I mean the Chinese Communist Party. But it also raises this question of, so those are the obvious ones. What other subtle nuances about the way that they want us to perceive the world is being worked into this model? And again, this is a government that has ideology that is very different than the perspectives of the free world. They very much control everything about the way that their entire society operates. They and and of course there is all of and again I don't want to get too deep into the political weeds here, but I do think that there are concerns about bias and potential deception. There was also a really interesting blog post that was written a ways back by Dario Amande that showed that even for the offline version, even if you just got the model weights and you're running that in a way that isn't directly being intercepted by whoever is hosting that service. There's also this question of potentially baking in intentionally deceptive behavior into those models as well. So I think that there's a lot of concern here. I think that I certainly wouldn't, and of course there's little to show that there's kind of those sleeper agents sitting in this model necessarily. It theoretically is
Well,
possible. You do know that,
I want to interrupt right there. I have a perception on this that I'd like to throw at you. I think we need to look at this from multiple different perspectives. First being government or official channels, second being corporate channels, and third being individual. You know, we let's use TikTok as the example. TikTok at the end of the day, if anybody knows anything about me, I am a very advocate, avid privacy and personal freedom advocate. You know, personally support EFF. If you don't know who EFF are, one of the greatest non for profits out there, if you ask me. But we're back to the idea of yes, this is a bad idea, but at what level do we control it without becoming that which we're trying to prevent?
so I think that's an interesting question because you're right. I also am a big advocate of free markets, and I think that is the argument of a lot of people. Is I should the reason that they're doing this protest in the first place is I should be able to express myself wherever I want to. I think what some people are not paying attention to is the fact that it's already not a free market, and what I mean by that is that currently our technology platforms here in the United States have to compete with Chinese apps that largely are copying what they're doing and just iterating over it to add some improvements. And so our markets are having to compete with their applications. But then if you look at what's going on over there, they've already restricted the market where none of the US based applications are accessible to the people in China. And so they have their markets shielded from our technology applications, whereas on our side, our technology applications have to compete with theirs. And so there is already this asymmetry to the market that is inherently unfair to competition in terms of US interests. And so while I don't like the idea of closing down free markets, I think we're already past that. This isn't a free market to begin with. And so I think there is an argument for potentially taking proactive action in order to protect United States interests and commercial interests within the technology sector.
And that's the point that I was trying to get to. And as somebody who is an augmented human, tattooed, body modded, I'm the last person that wants to tell anybody what you can do with your life. But I also have to be able to look at it from a business executive's perspective towards proprietary information. And I need to look at it from a governmental perspective in terms of national security. So, the reason I brought that up is, did you hear what actually happened on the 31st here in Texas?
What happened?
Okay. Apparently, and yes, if y'all didn't know it, and y'all should have given it away, Hutch and I live in the great state of Texas. I wasn't born here, but I did get here as quickly as I could. And for the record, if you're ever doing a presentation, and Hutch can attest the fact that I did this, if you're ever doing your first presentation in Texas, I would recommend this in Houston or Dallas. When you first walk up to the podium, just go, "The stars at night are big and bright," and the entire hall will do it.
Listen, I'll prove it.
The stars at night are big and bright. Deep in the heart of Texas.
I had no idea. I thought it was, I really didn't know, but it works. Try it. But our Governor Abbott, actually, on January 31st, Governor Abbott implemented a ban due to the concerns over the data and security and foreign influence. So he not only banned on all Texas official devices
We're not
DeepSeek.
talking about TikTok. We're talking about DeepSeek here. Was banned.
Oh, we're talking not just DeepSeek. He banned DeepSeek, Red Note, and Lemonade. So all three Chinese versions of standard US normalized social media applications. So in this, I can understand to an extent. And I'm just curious, what do you think this is how we're going to start seeing more of this technology moving into the US market? Because I think you said it best, what we're dealing with here, there is some point where we can say, yes, is this a national security threat? But just like I was saying with TikTok, a threat does not stop being a threat just based solely on who is the one operating in the system and who's behind the code. If it's a threat because it's collecting evidence and data on its users, it's going to be a threat. If it's the Chinese government, if it's the US government, if it's the Canadian government, the Mexican government, it doesn't matter. So now that we're seeing this, is this the litmus test to future technology trying to make its way into the United States, and we just start claiming national security or data security things and we start limiting access?
Yeah, I would like to think that this is a China specific thing. I certainly, I mean, obviously there's different perspectives on isolationism versus globalization. I do think that there is value in open global markets because I do think that it provides the opportunity for competition. I think
So do I.
that competition is inherently undermined when you do have an adversary that is going out of their way to steal your intellectual property. And I guess to circle back on, we talked about this a little bit.
Well, I want to throw a statement right there because what you just said triggered a memory from me. And I can give you a response that I think China would use in pretty much every adversarial country, with the exception of those that we know are actively trying to hurt us as United States. I'm Everybody that knows anything about me knows I used to ride in the motorcycle clubs, right? So we had a saying: we are not a criminal organization. However, there may be some criminals within our organization. That's a way to shift blame on the group to a single individual. So China, they're not going to say, oh, we are stealing your secrets. Oh, that's just these individuals over here. And they're hiding under that socialist blanket.
Except that China is a very controlling dictatorship. And if things are happening significantly at scale, at the rate at which we're seeing aggressive cyber attacks against the United States and have been for decades, it absolutely, and there's no question as far as a lot of it's being state sponsored. But what's interesting is we are seeing, like I said, that intellectual property theft too. And it's not just the cute logo and it's not just the interface. If one of the things that's come out since this app has been released is that frequently when you interact with it, it will say, I can't do that because OpenAI restricts blah, blah, blah. And it's replying as if it is ChatGPT. And the conclusion that has broadly been arrived at is that this model was actually distilled from interactions with OpenAI's models and kind of automation. And of course, I don't want to say that there was no innovation here. There was. They
Oh,
absolutely.
absolutely. We need to talk about performance on degraded hardware at some point.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so they used older NVIDIA cards. So that alone is impressive what they were able to pull off with that. On top of that, they introduced a very impressive mixture of models type solution, which they where they essentially do very efficient routing in order to minimize the requirements and compute necessary in order to run through iterations of the model. So there was definitely some interesting innovation here. That innovation unquestionably was built on top of the shoulders of what OpenAI had already been done. And they essentially were siphoning from that model in order to train their own model. So it's no surprise that they were able to do it on a cheaper budget when you're relying on a more impressive, capable model that's already been built in order to do that.
See, I want to throw a different perspective there. Yeah, they did it, but it wasn't because they chose to. They did it because they had to. And I think that's the part about this whole story that's managed to throw the entire market into a complete frenzy. You know, we've been the leaders in this space since day one. We're the ones that are getting the NVIDIA A100 chips. We have the Ferraris of GPUs. And what was it, 2022, when we basically export controlled access to the higher powered chips into China? It wasn't that they decided to do this, they had to because they didn't have anything faster to write it on. Which, as our resident, AI expert, do you think that this hitting the market is actually going to force the Sam Altmans of the world to go, maybe the solution, and you and I have talked about this many times, the solution is not to just continuously throw hardware at it, and we need to find more efficient code.
Yeah, I do think that assuming that scaling is going to be the end all be all is not the answer. We can't just make this a competition of who can throw the most resources at it, because if we limit our capabilities to just that, just how deep our pocketbooks are, ultimately we're not going to win, because this is early in these capabilities. There is still a lot of low-hanging fruit in terms of innovation. There's a lot of opportunities for making these systems more efficient, and innovation is going to absolutely be critical. I think that there's no question that we're going to see, based on what they're able to glean from all of the disclosures, there's no question that we're going to see OpenAI and Anthropic and Google and all of the leaders start to adopt the lessons learned from this model into their own technologies. And I think so. Dario Amodei, who is the one of the co-founders of Anthropic, he just released a blog where he talked about how to him this isn't nearly as concerning as it is being made out to be, in terms of the United States effectively losing this AI race. And he simply pointed out that this really doesn't change the scaling requirement at all. We still want to scale, but he said that we frequently have these innovations that basically just shift the curve. So that's to say, we still want to pursue that curve. We'll just get there faster because we use the scale plus those efficiencies. And so at the end of the day, this is still a race to AGI. It is very much a winner takes all race, because once you get to something akin to AGI, it is going to essentially feed itself. It is going the self-sustain. What is the term that Ray Kurzweil used?
Oh, the self-perpetual
Well,
machine.
no, well, Yeah, more or less the same idea, but law of accelerating returns. So this idea, as those advances in technology continue to increase, they're going to feed in on themselves, and you're just going to have this takeoff moment. And of course, we're already seeing that with coding. I mean, it's rapidly advancing as far as AI capabilities, and so there is still. Dario rightfully pointed out that the market reaction was very much an overreaction. The idea that we're just going to stop scaling because it was possible to do that as efficiently as they did is nonsense. We're going to continue scaling, and we're also just going to incorporate those capabilities in it to just move faster and faster.
The thing that this whole situation brought back to the front for me is, you remember when, about 2 or 3 episodes back, where we were talking about the leaks of Chat GPT-5 and how they were saying that they were not receiving the performance that we expected. Yep, and Sam Altman pushed it out till late 2025, possibly 2026. I'm wondering if this was just the perfect storm, and if this is going to be one of those things that actually really does pop the AI bubble for us, in a sense, here within the United States. You know, because I think the fact that what DeepSeek was able to do, and I agree with you in terms of the fact that they trained this, they leveraged the hell out of ChatGPT to do this. But at the same time, they did it for, I mean, you're better on the numbers on this than me, but the last thing that I was able to look up was GPT 3.5 cost between 10 to 12 million, and when it came to GPT-4, all it said was hundreds of millions. And these guys pulled this whole thing off for 6. So what does this do for investors and what they would expect for returns?
I have seen a lot to suggest that the $5 to $6 million is not actually accurate. That may just their training run, and that it did not take into account any of the hardware that they had, which granted was legacy hardware. It was older NVIDIA chips, but they still sourced. My understanding is hundreds of millions of dollars in legacy NVIDIA chips that were used just as the hardware portion of this. So there's no question that there was a lot more money put in it than what they were trying to make it appear.
Creative accounting.
It was absolutely creative accounting.
And there's one thing that, we talked about the other day that I think is really valuable to our listenership. And that was when we were just discussing, because I'm going to cue you up exactly the same way we were in our phone conversation, because I think your answer was perfect, Hutch. But they were able to make this do comparable performance with $6 million degraded chips over Chat GPT, and they did just as good. And you set me straight.
Yeah, I mean, the benchmarks are a huge challenge right now. So benchmarks right now, we're struggling to even make benchmarks as fast as we're checking them off. I mean, we've got stuff that's outperforming all of these, and at this point, we can't even come up with ideas of ways to uniquely challenge these models that actually distinguishes kind of the frontier from the super frontier. And I think so. They're
And what was and the one part that I wanted to really focus on was, you said it was really good at math.
Yes, so they used reinforcement learning in order to continue to optimize this. And one of the things that they did, one of the things that we are seeing on both sides, both in US models as well as what we saw over there, is what it was particularly good at was the math reasoning benchmarks. And math is a skill set that is very optimizable, if optimizable is even a word, but very optimizable through reinforcement learning, because you can close loop it. And what I mean by that is that you can create a math problem, you create that math problem, it has a very clear and exact answer, and then prompt a model with it, and then provide benefits or reward functions for models that succeed at that, and then penalize ones that don't, and of course adjust the weights accordingly. So doing closed loop automated reinforcement learning specifically targeted at the math benchmarks, those are going to be the ones that we see really take off compared to other more soft skills. I've already seen quite a few interactions with
And
this.
that was going to be my next question, brother. So in terms of the advertising, Anybody that watches our show knows you're the AI guy. I'm the ex-black hat transhuman. So you opened my eyes to the fact that yes, it may have comparable performances in certain areas, but this is not a direct apples to apples comparison in all function.
No, not at all. And
that's important.
Yeah, I think it was overhyped in terms of what it was capable of. I think it was also overhyped in terms of how much or how cheap it actually was. I think that it very much was it's become very apparent that it was copied. Actually, there is this. Did you ever watch Silicon Valley, the HBO TV
Oh,
show?
yes. Come on, man. Which geek of us has not watched that?
So, of course, there is Jin Yang, who is one of the characters from China who's in the incubator program. And when he comes up with his own ideas of applications throughout the show, they were always like really odd application ideas. Like he had his hot dog or not app, where you'd point your phone at something and it would either tell you it's a hot dog or it isn't. And so just absurd ideas. And then by the end of some of the later seasons, he actually becomes a really successful businessman in China. And there's a scene before that where he's seen in front of the whiteboard, basically just has different versions of all different US tech companies, and it just says new Reddit and new Twitter and new Instagram. And when you ask the question, are you copying all of those for the Chinese market? And it's funny, but it really does parallel what we see in the tech sector as far as the relationship between the United States and China, where you will see almost carbon copies of our applications. But there is something here as to why I think they're being successful in getting a foothold in the United States where we may not be doing as well. And we can see that, of course, with TikTok. DeepSeek is another example of that. And I think that is that once they steal an idea, I don't think that they don't seem to innovate as much, but once they steal that idea, they're able to iterate over it, and they are an extremely hardworking people. Unfortunately, they have to be, because they are literally forced to comply with all of these expectations with government. But because of that, you have a very hardworking people that do iterate over and create improvements very rapidly, very effectively. And I think that here in the United States, again, I'm not trying to get too deep into politics, but I do think that we've moved away from meritocracy and awarding people for doing well for themselves. And because of that, I feel like we have this, at least to some extent, we have this cultural rot where people are not.
Innovation is stunted here at home.
Yeah, I don't think that there's anybody that doesn't know, can't name a bunch of people that they work with that are effectively just cogs in the wheel, that are just happy to be there and collect a paycheck and don't really put in that effort on a day-to-day basis. And I think that that is unfortunately systemic to our society. So I do think that we have these big grand ideas and we deploy them, but we don't iterate over them as effectively. And so because of that, we see them getting a foothold using tech that they ultimately copied, but then they're able to improve upon.
Absolutely. And, the one thing that I need to bring up, we've talked a lot about DeepSeek up to this point, but now I want to steer the last of our conversation around to my wheelhouse for being this, just rocket from nothingness to the top of the AI Titan realm. These guys haven't even been out for 30 days and they've already been breached multiple times.
They have, yes. Yeah, so it was some type of database they were using. I don't recall.
Oh, that we're gonna get to that. But the first attack actually happened on January 27th, where DeepSeek reported experiencing large-scale malicious attacks that disrupted their new user registration. So essentially, they almost got, from the sounds of it, DDoSed for new users. Existing users could log in without any issues. The company then DeepSeek actually temporarily restricted new sign-ons to emails of Gmail accounts or Chinese phone numbers just to mitigate the onslaught of the new request. They basically had to put in a regex to determine, where are you coming from? If you're not one of these or one of ours, get out.
So I'm curious on that one, how much of that actually was a deliberate denial of
I don't think it was.
Or
That was what I was going to say. I think that was a natural DDoS.
yeah, they weren't ready to scale for the amount of the horde of people that came over from the U.S. market suddenly to.
Yes, I think they were used to a much smaller connection base. And once this became viral here, this is one of the few times that I will say this is one of the most amazing DDoSes I've ever seen that was not deliberately done. You know, this goes to Hutch's point. If you're going to try and make the next big thing, make sure your infrastructure is ready for it if it so happens to happen. And then very shortly after that, Wiz, which is a security company, good friends of the show. I'm sure Hutch, you know some of those guys. I know I do. You know, so hats off to Wiz. You know, they actually just, and from a hacker's perspective, we expect some difficulty. We do. And I'm going to get up on my soapbox as a former black hat and say there are times where I have had to work a target for a long, long time to find that one, just that one teeny little chink in the armor that I could expose and try and work and build a hole to get through. What did Wiz do? Let's do a network scan and see all of the available URLs to this domain. Okay. What's this? Open source database. Not locked down.
Yeah, it was pretty much just anonymous access, right? Just unauthenticated.
Yeah.
They just browsed the port, and there you go.
Yep.
My understanding was it was the
It was
whole
sensitive data.
conversation logs,
The conversation laws, internal API registries. Let's see, containing over 1 million lines of sensitive data, including chat logs, secret keys, backend information. You know, and they basically came out straight up and said this exposure could have allowed unauthorized access to critical system components.
You know what's crazy is I think there was a parallel with ChatGPT had something very similar. It wasn't quite this bad. So it wasn't that the database was fully anonymous access, but there was some weird session handling malfunction of their application at one point where users would log in and they would see other people's chat history that wasn't their own. And so essentially where they would usually see their history, they would see other people's or some random
Somebody
else's
else's.
conversations. And so it is interesting to see. And I think that there is a reason why we're seeing that both and I don't think in this case it has anything to do with China or the US. I think it's moving so fast.
That I was about to say, you have people who are AI data scientists, you have programmers. You are trying to push the envelope of this technology as far as fast as humanly possible. And security was, is, and continues to be the afterthought.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's rushed to the market and security takes a backseat.
You know, I want to say this last thing, and you know, I know we're running long, so this is kind of where my last statement on this, unless you've got anything else. But I saw a report coming out of China, attribution of the attacks. Reporters have indicated that the cyber attacks targeting DeepSeek are originated from the U.S. IP addresses, leading to tensions between China and the United States over cybersecurity concerns. Anybody ever looked at a Nord live attack map? That's all I'm going to say. The amount of lobs coming out of, you know, East Asia to everywhere, it looks like a fountain. And the one time that they get one little lob coming back, now it's world news.
Yeah, I think I obviously there's a level of distrust on both sides that's built up over the years. I think that the truth is I think either side takes any opportunity they can to point to the other guy and be like, "There's the bad guy." I don't want to get into moral superiority here. I do think that there's a lot of things that are core.
Oh, I need, since you brought that up, Hutch, I got to say this. This wasn't about moral superiority. It was more about just hypocrisy.
Yeah, no. You're absolutely right. Yeah, we see a nonstop attacks coming from that part of the world. I mean, we look just back at what's happened the last couple of years in terms of what CISA has disclosed to us, and this is what we know about as the public, and we pretty much know that they are sitting and have established persistence in pretty much all of our critical infrastructure. Everything from
Yeah, the salt typhoon mean anything to anybody out there?
Yep, and Volt Typhoon, and yeah, it just so yeah, you're absolutely right. There is, but again, I think that they see this as an opportunity to push their agenda, to create some anti-U.S. propaganda, and they'll seize any opportunity to do that, even if it is, as we suspect it might be, just a flood of actual registration attempts and them just not being scalable enough to handle it, and not even an actual true malicious denial of service attack.
Yeah, it's weird. The people that have caused so much technical destruction around the world, the minute you know one of their companies gets something happening in return, the response to me, I just find doesn't equal out. But this has been one hell of a conversation, brother. And I don't think this is going to be the last time we talk about DeepSeek or, foreign AIs trying to make their way into the US market.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if this is a one-time thing for DeepSeek or if they really stay in this race and continue to innovate time over time. But I think
if it's not going to be them, it's going to be somebody else. So
yeah,
I think all this stuff it really did was set precedents.
Yeah.
And the question begs, what happens to the next guy? Is it going to be national security or is it going to be free market?
This has been another episode of the Cybercognition Podcast. If you enjoyed this show, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And check out other shows on the Cyber Circus Network for the best in cyber entertainment and the greatest show on Earth.